Okay, so if I were to start from scratch, building a community, the first thing you need to do is
All right, we're live. Thanks everyone for joining on another episode of Life Sciences 360. Today I have with me Etienne Nichols. He is the medical device guru and community manager at Greenlight Guru. Thanks for joining us, Etienne.
thanks for asking me to be on. It's great to be here. It's interesting to be on the other side of the interviewing because I interview a lot of people myself, so it's good to be on this side for once, though.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to this conversation. Your background is really interesting. You've had some roles in the past in engineering. You did some internships, then you had a role in steel manufacturing or company in that sector. You've also done some roles in aircraft interiors and work with a company. So walk me through, how did you end up in all these roles, and then what inspired you to then go into medical devices and medtech?
Yeah. Oh man, you're kind of sparking some memories here, honestly. So one of my first engineering roles, yeah, as you mentioned, it was in the aerospace industry. I got that job through Craigslist, believe it or not. And this is
Wow.
this is many years ago, at least in my mind. It's eons for me. But I sent my resume to a guy. His name is Paul Wanamaker. Best boss I've ever had. I love that guy. I'd work with him still if I was still in Oklahoma. But I was turned down for the job. He had somebody else he liked better. And then 2 weeks later, he called me and said, "Well, they didn't show up. Are you still interested?" And I'm not proud. Yes, I was pumped because I was I just wanted to get my foot in the door somewhere at the time. So I worked in the aerospace industry working on destructive testing for custom aircraft interiors. And let me say that it was fun. It was fantastic. The job was varied. I worked on a manual 3-axis Bridgeport. I also did TIG welding, thousands of hours on those. And I actually got to the point where I told him, I'm like, listen, I'm supposed to be an engineer. I need to do more SolidWorks. And he said, okay, you can do SolidWorks. We'll do that. He made me do more than SolidWorks. We went all through SolidWorks. I get there at 6 a.m. He trained me how to do that, and we worked hard. But he also had me do free body hand calculations. So he was a great boss, very well rounded from a product development standpoint. So I learned a lot from him.
And when you were in that role, I'm just curious, what kind of, can you share some examples of like FFA specifications or requirements that you had to follow in that role?
Well, it's a good question. Most of the specifications, most of the regulations were filtered through my manager. I was more the boots on the ground, just doing what I was, some of the engineering work to make things work and generating those reports. That said, when I think about those other industries, the FAA is regulated. You mentioned the steel industry, and I know I've mentioned on another podcast some stories about that. They're regulated differently than medical devices, and I can't speak a lot to the regulation for FAA. It's been so long since I've been there. I can't really speak to the quality management system and the different requirements there. However, when I think through the other industries I've worked in, whether it's new product development where you're more in an R&D role, because I did have that role for a little while, or the steel industry where you might not have the same level of requirements, particularly from a regulated standpoint, because it doesn't necessarily interact with the end users per se. The big difference I think of are really those requirements around change orders. Part 8 20.40 document controls. That's one of the things that was one of the biggest shocks to me from the industry. And that is the requirement that you have a story from, if you're changing anything, whether it's product or process, you need a story as to how you got from Rev A to Rev B, who approved it, when it was improved, and justification for those changes. So that's one of the biggest things, I guess, I think about when I think of the differences in the different industries that I've worked in.
Interesting. And you mentioned about having internship at OSU in the New Product Development Center. So when you were there, I know it was early on in your career, but then do you remember any projects or any skills that you learned in that job? Because internships and the first jobs when you get, they can be either really great because you learned so many skills, or if you end up in a job that's just really monotonous and you're not learning anything, it can also be a really bad. So how was your experience, and any skills that transferred on to your future roles and today at Greenlight Guru?
Great question. And I love the way you set that up, because honestly, I don't think I've ever had a role that I could say was boring or manual. And that could be my personality, that once I get to that level, I look for the next thing. And I could go down that rabbit trail. But let me answer your question specifically about the new product development center. So the Oklahoma State University has sort of like an extension office for new product development. And the purpose of that is to offer engineering to lower income or rural areas that might not be able to afford engineering. I was a senior. I was already working on my senior project, and that's who they wanted in those roles, senior engineering students. And so I was exposed to a lot of different things in that role. I went to different manufacturing facilities. We actually designed a screw mechanism for an injection mold machine. It was a large size injection molder machine. So I was on a team with four other engineers, and one story stands out to me in particular. We were tasked to design this certain, I can't even tell you exactly what it was. We were supposed to design something, and we were looking at the competitors, and we had analyzed all those things, and we couldn't figure out exactly what part they were using to accomplish some mechanism. And they just were working and working and working and trying to figure it out. And I said, why don't we just call them? I said, what? So I called the competitor. I'm like, hey, curious how you guys do this one thing. And they told me. Just,
Wow.
I didn't tell them who I was. They offered the thing, and we looked at them and like, okay, we could use that mechanism. We could actually make it a little bit better by doing this. And we've moved on from there. And that's one of the things that I realized early on that I had a unique talent for, I guess, when I'm on different engineering teams is we want, as engineers, we want to plow through the problem using the things that we've been taught in school, which is great. We should. But at the same time, sometimes there's a lateral move that you can make where you just go say, hey, you on the marketing team or you on the quality team, what do you think? And they can give you the answer that maybe you would have worked hours to find. The soft skill that I think a lot of engineers don't always flex that muscle.
Yeah. Yeah. Agreed. Yeah, I've worked with a lot of engineers, and I was talking to somebody else on the podcast a few weeks ago as well. That the guest was mentioning how he's hired a bunch of people who are from engineering backgrounds, and the documentation that these people and this employee created were extremely lengthy, but in a good way, had tons of information, but a life science audience or stakeholder would find that completely overwhelming, right? So this person had to tell them like, hey, life sciences, you don't need to go so much into detail and put so many diagrams because it's not expected of you. It's great you're doing it, but just cut back. So it's always interesting to know things like quality management that apply to food, aeronautic, aircraft industry, steel, life sciences. At a core level, it's the same concepts, but still the documentation and the way you approach projects is really different.
Yeah, and just to kind of add on to that, I love seeing all of the details. For example, I'll just use an email as an example. Someone may email me a book. It
Yeah.
feels like, with all the details, and I love that. But at the same time, sometimes I'm in the more in the mind where, okay, I can't actually get through all this. I just need the bullet points, the executive summary. And if you can learn to create that executive summary and just tell the story in the minimum amount of words, I think that can be very helpful in your career in being able to get that point across. So
Everyone wants TLDR.
exactly. I actually included TLDR, too long, don't read,
Yeah.
in the first part of my presentation. If there's anybody above a director level in a presentation I'm going to give, my PowerPoints always start with the TLDR. Strong recommendation. That's a great point.
So I know that you probably don't go a single day without uttering the word QMS in your job. So I want to ask you a few questions about that. How have you seen quality management systems change over the last 5 or 10 years in life sciences?
It's a good question. So quality management systems, there's a lot of things happening in medtech right now. Let's start with how things used to be. Actually, how things still are in a lot of places. And that is, for years, companies have used paper-based quality management systems simply because what's the other option? The other option is to maybe purchase a massive software system that's going to require an incredibly large validation effort that maybe smaller companies just can't afford. So they're going to have all their SOPs on paper, and they literally keep them in a filing cabinet. Well, all of us can see the inefficiencies there. So that's one of the discouraging things. 2020 rolled around and it forced everybody to at least put those things on SharePoint, Google Drive, Dropbox, whatever. Then companies were faced with another problem. How do I validate this? How do I maintain revision control, that Part 820.40 that I talked about? Also, a third thing that a lot of companies aren't aware of, how do I maintain that Part 11 electronic signatures compliance? So you maybe they may couple it together and try to use DocuSign, which then you have frustrations with across departments. So there's a lot of things like that. It's almost like the second order, and it's getting better. But then now there are specifically options available now for MedTech that are specifically built for MedTech, keeping those Part 11, Part 820.40 thoughts and compliance in mind. So there's software solutions that are pre-validated specifically for MedTech. So that's exciting to me. When I think of quality management systems, that is really the exciting thing, that so many companies are now able to shift their focus from building out a quality management system and validating that software that's just simply going to hold SOPs. Now they can shift it to actually focusing on the words that should be in your SOP and the actual engineering, the things that we're really good at, being able to focus on those things.
Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned the shift in the focus, right? Because I agree with you that in the current state, most QMS systems are nothing but document repositories. Yes, they have some additional features. They may have electronic signatures and reports. But what I want to ask you, I have some ideas on this. I think I know where this could go. Do you know, like, what do you think is the future? What do you think a QMS 5 or 10 years from now, what kind of features will that have? Have you thought about this?
Yeah, that's a good question. So there's two answers. One, I think I know the question, you're kind of where you're headed, but I'm going to go a different direction for a moment. So
Okay.
you're right. A lot of times, what you see out there that we call an EQMS, electronic quality management system, it's a document management system, and a document management system is valuable, and you need that. But there are other things. You need design controls, for example. A lot of times that's done in Excel. You need risk management, again, usually done in Excel. And those things are hard to link together. Anytime you revise an Excel document, I'm just going to use design controls as an example. Bear with me while they go down this rabbit trail. If you change a user need in your Excel spreadsheet, and then you try to circulate that for approval for the change, you're going to have to make sure every user need, where every instance where that is occurring, needs to also reflect that change and anything that it could potentially impact. So that there's a lot of difficulty around the current state of things. So if you zoom out, when I think of a full picture quality management system for a medical device company, sure, you'll have your document management system for those records, those SOPs. You'll also have things for design controls, risk management. You'll also have things for your DHRs, your BOMs. All of those things could be either auto-generated and interconnected. And that's the big thing that I see quality management systems going towards. Now, the other side of it, there's another aspect, and that is the actual, you're right, we just upload. Oftentimes, when whatever document management system you're looking at, you might just upload the documents from Google Drive or wherever else you generated those. Maybe in the future, there could be a possibility where you have all of those. Those are things that you input your specifics. Say, I'm a Class 2 medical device company. I'm pursuing I'm pursuing EUMDR, and we intend to market at such and such date. And it could start automating, okay, you need these forms that will be auto-generated with certain aspects around clinical validation or clinical evaluation reporting, for example, for your EUMDR. And more of those specifics that come in a staged form, rather than dumping a million documents in all at the same time, some of which you may not actually need at the moment. I don't know. Does that make sense? I'm curious what your thoughts are.
Yes, it does. And I'm gonna say I have comments for both the parts. So the first one that you said, the connectedness, that is a challenge for the industry. That's something I've talked to many clients and many people, leads, even when I go out and talk to them about what we do at Cultivate. We're not a software company, we're a consulting service provider, but we know some off the shelf tools that can provide these capabilities. if the QMS company is willing to sort of allow the access of third party tools, we can do that. Some companies don't allow that, but it's a different story. But yes, you're absolutely right. It's until you get that connectedness between the people, the process, and the systems, it's really hard to make a decision, right? So if you look at a company that's using, let's say, a QMS for doc management and are using something else for training and another system for something else, right there, you're not going to have any connectedness because you have three different systems. If you have all in one, maybe you have some connectedness, but not to the level of you asking a question of what should I do if I delete this SOP or make this obsolete? What should I do next, right? If you have the connectedness at a most mature level, the QMS should be able to tell you you need to ask this person to take this role, or you need to remove this from all of these training, something along those lines, right? Because the data structure knows what is connected to what, and automation. So I definitely agree that that's more and more QMS systems are going to have those features. It's not clear as to what the end user wants, but it's clear that they want some type of
Yeah.
connectedness.
Well, it makes me think of, Steve Jobs is one that we talk about when we think of like what a user needs versus what a user wants, what they don't even know they want. That when he came up with the iPhone, for example, who
Yeah.
wants a phone with no buttons? Well, it turns out all of us apparently. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's a good point. When one of the things that I love about the software that I work with is the fact that we have that Kappa management, design controls, risk management, all those different things can be connected. And just training, for example, that's another one. So all of those things are, the fact that they can all be connected is really exciting to me. I've worked in companies where you've probably seen this before, and I'd be
Yep.
interested to hear your stories, honestly. But you had one system for Kappa, one system for complaints, one system for your PLM, another ERP, your quality management system, your design controls and risk. They all live in separate places. So maybe seven systems. I'll throw one other thing out there. We recently interviewed 613 medtech professionals in our benchmark study, just to say the state of quality and regulatory for medtech. And we actually saw an average of 9 different tools that medtech companies are using, which is really interesting. That's the average. I don't know what the standard deviation is right now, but I don't know if you want to put that in the show notes. I could provide you with a link to that benchmark study if that's of interest.
Yeah, that would be interesting. And the other part that you were mentioning about having a system where you could put in some inputs, like I have a class 2 product, or I'm trying to comply with EUMD or whatever the regulations are. And my immediate thought was yes, but then maybe a step further, right? So like if I don't work much into medical devices, so I don't know much of that territory, but I know biotech and pharma a lot. So you would put in that, hey, these are my regs, or these are the standards I need to comply with. Show me all the deliverables that I need and give me some guidance of what I need if I'm in phase 2 versus phase 3. Great stuff. The next level to elevate that would be to have templates, maybe use artificial intelligence to do intelligent authoring. And ISO is doing this. They're actually testing out. I don't know exactly how they're using it, but they're testing out intelligent authoring where they have templates of how a certain document should look. So, like a validation plan or design spec should have these 10 things. And then the user just goes and uses that template and puts in more inputs so the AI can generate a design spec. So all the documents sort of look consistent, because today it's all manual, right? Like if I write a design spec and I leave the company, and the next person could write it better or worse depending on, how much expertise they have. So to me, yeah, that's an interesting thing that you mentioned. But I think the next step would be to also templatize each of those deliverables. So then all the outputs would be.
Well, it's interesting. As long as we're going next steps, I'll go even one more possibly. Let's say I have a device that I know I could maybe let me just say I could go through the FDA site and say, hey, this, and this could be potential predicates for my device, or I have a small subset of devices that I think they're the most likely to be predicates. And then an AI tool that could crawl that and come back and say, these are all of the specifications they used. And that's likely what you're going to use. So maybe even starting out with an even broader foundation for those design inputs. Like, yeah, it's interesting the different possibilities that are out there. And one of the things that I think I can't help but highlight is that medtech, because I am, you're more biosciences and so forth. I'm purely medical devices anymore. I hardly ever get out of that. I was in combination products for a little while, but I'm purely medical device now. But there are so many different gaps and that software solution can fill. And it's really exciting to see, brainstorm or hear people talk about the ways that they could be filled.
Yeah. I love this kind of stuff. So if anyone out there listening is building something, a product or a QMS like this, I would love to talk to you and just give you a bunch of free ideas. I want to switch gears and ask you a little bit non-technical. I don't,
Yeah.
I guess it's not really non-technical, but I know that you're involved in a lot of community building. I see a lot of content from you on LinkedIn, personal stuff that you share, whether you've traveled or something that you came across or something from your company. What strategies do you use for developing or building sort of an online community? Because I see that not many people in life sciences are doing that. It's popular in tech and other industries. Life sciences, I don't see a lot of people doing it. You're doing it really well. I see a lot of the stuff. Can you share what strategies do you use or have been using?
So I love storytelling. Obviously, if you follow me on LinkedIn at all, I love to tell stories about my personal life. Thankfully, my wife's not on LinkedIn, so I can get away with some of these things.
Yeah.
They're all good. So storytelling, obviously, it's we already mentioned the TLDR for executives in your PowerPoint. This is it should be across your entire career is learning how to tell a story, and so that sort of draws a certain amount of crowd. The other thing that I think is important is to always be curious. And we'll get to the actual, maybe some nuts and bolts of building a community in a moment here. But I think just as a person, if you're curious and you're willing to be a beginner, even if you have years and years of experience, I work with quality management systems every day, but I'm willing to be taught. And so having that beginner's mindset with the heart of a teacher, I think is really important. And people tend to recognize whether if you're faking it or if you're not. So when I try to teach people online, I do it with the recognition that someone else may know this better than I, and I'm happy for them to correct me. I actually had an incident yesterday where I was a little bit harsher than I meant to be, and the person came back and said, "Hey, I feel like I'm being mischaracterized." I'm like, and so I apologize. I apologized to him there, and so anybody could go find that. You can find that yesterday. This February 21st post, and I apologize to him privately as well. I want to build true relationships. I think sometimes we forget online that these are real people behind the screen, and myself included. I want to never forget that. So I think that's important.
You're absolutely right. Storytelling is something that can really help you, whether you're running a business or you're just working 9 to 5 or you're doing something else. One book that really helped me learn a lot about storytelling, I'm not sure if you've read it,
I'm writing it
is
down.
called Story Brand by Donald Miller.
Okay.
It's a really amazing book. It walks you through basically how in movies and TV shows how stories are built. Like you have like a main character, then you have like a supporting character, you have the villain, but it takes those characters and personas and tells you how to craft a story for your business. So like how to think of who's the main character, who's the villain. So it's a really amazing book. I read that and it gave me a lot of clarity of defining my story or how I want to present that. So if anybody's interested in storytelling, it's one of the top 5 books that I pretty much everyone that is all fanatic about storytelling has referred that book. So
That's fantastic. Thank you for the book recommendation. I love that.
I want to ask you this. You talked about storytelling and you're involved in these different community building events. Have you ever have a story or a time of an event where you actually saw the community building directly impact a patient outcome, or a patient saw that and said like, any stories that it went to that level? Or
Good question. I did hear a story from Mike Baca once that was really moving. So as far as the community building itself, like the things I've been involved in, I've not been at it long enough maybe to see some of those things come to fruition, maybe as far as the actual patient outcome, perhaps. At least nothing's coming to mind at the moment. But I remember him telling the story about how he experienced there was a situation, a complaint from the field, and he realized people could actually die if we don't stop this complaint. So he traveled to every hospital and he sat down with the doctors and he spoke to them and he said, listen, this is the reason we don't want you to use this device like this anymore. I know a lot of doctors are using this and promoting it, maybe an off label. I don't remember the specifics, but he spoke to every user, and that really impacted me at the level of care that he put into the quality of his product and wanting to make sure that the end user was safe and things were being used appropriately. That was really powerful for me. If I circle back to the community building aspect, like you mentioned, I mean, storytelling, we could go down that, and now I've got to read this book. So I'll have to reach out to you once I get that
Yes.
and check it out again. There's something else that a couple other books that I've read on story or on community building. Number one, I recommend is The Business of Belonging, How to Make Community Your Competitive Advantage.
Mm-hmm.
That's a good book. The other one is more philosophical. It's by Priya Parker, The Art of Gathering, How We Meet and Why It Matters. So both of those books are good. One is more business focused, I guess, but those are some tools for when it comes to the community building aspects, though.
And for the audience that is not gonna read those books,
Okay.
can you give us a TLDR of 5 things they can do to build their community online?
Absolutely. Yeah, no, that's a good reminder. You're right. Not everybody's going to sit down and read the book. Okay, so if I were to start from scratch, building a community, the first thing you need to do is let people know what it is that you're even interested in, because at its core, community really is the people you go to for help when you need help with anything. That's at least my definition, because I actually have a slide internally. For those of you who don't know, I'm building an official online community and forum. It's community.greenlight.guru. It's the MedTech Excellence community. So there is that aside from what I do on LinkedIn. But I talk about that internally. So what's an actual community? Community is, to me, it's the people I trust my kids with. It's the people I go on vacation with, maybe snowboarding. I do an annual snowboarding trip. It's the people who help me in just these different ways. Okay, so how do you build that online? Well, one of the ways you mentioned LinkedIn. If you're wanting to build that online, what are you truly interested in? LinkedIn is a community for professionals. Facebook might be a little more personal. Instagram, again, a little bit more personal. So depending on what you're interested in, let's use LinkedIn. We're in a business context. Let's say you're a software developer. You're interested in software. Whether you know it or not, you're interested in that. Start posting about those things so that you can attract people who are interested in the things that you're interested in. And then you go find, whether searching for those people using software developer as the job, you find those other people who are in a similar lateral role or maybe slightly above, depending on what your goals are, and you follow them, you comment on their posts. It's just, I actually like to remove it from the online experience and think about if you're at a conference. At a conference, it's a very similar situation. It's just not as laid out graphically. I want to go there. I want to meet somebody who does something similar to what I do. When I hear somebody has a podcast, for example, I run the Global Medical Device Podcast. I want to know what podcast you're doing. I want to know about Life Sciences 360. We're probably going to talk about microphones. We'll talk about, the software we use, everything. You find your tribe at a conference, the people who really pique your interest. So online, it's similar. You just have to be a little bit more deliberate about it, I guess, if that makes sense. I don't know if that helps, but that's
yes. Yeah. And I was talking about this with somebody else and how we evolved during the hunter-gatherer times and before technology, where if you wanted to be a part of a community, you would have to had physical access to the person that ran the community, or somebody, like if I wanted to be part of a community of people that played soccer, like I had to know somebody who played soccer or see a soccer ball or a field somewhere and stand there to wait for people to come so I can tell them, hey, can I join, or when do you guys play? Now you can search for those things. You can go to any website and search for a soccer meetup or whatever you're trying to do. So the you can join a lot of different communities very fast, but it's also, you have to kind of know where you want to invest your time, because there's just so many different avenues. Like LinkedIn is one, but Facebook groups or wherever you want to try to find your audience and hang out with them.
Yeah, and you had asked for 5 tips, so I kind of want to add on to the one that you had mentioned because I only gave you a couple of random
Yeah,
ones. So
yeah.
let me be more structured here. So one of the things that I would say, if I could give you a tactical piece of advice, if you went to a conference or a live event related to your industry, a lot of people will go there and they might meet one person and really that's their conference buddy and they know that person from then on. That's actually really good. So there's 2 ways to build this network or community. You can do that, go deep with one person or 2 or 3 people, and I actually highly recommend that. That really helps hone your skills. But another way is to be something of a connector, in that whenever you meet somebody, you're immediately, your brain, this is the way my brain works. My brain is thinking, okay, what does this person do? They're in sterilization. Okay, I actually know somebody who's looking for a new modality of sterilization. Let me go introduce them. So how do you get to that point? The most important question I try to get to in my conversations at conferences is what are your goals? So it's a very straightforward question, and people tell me all the time, it's like, oh, that's an interesting question. My goals for this conference are, if they know them, they'll tell me, and I can immediately start applying my network to help solve their problem. And while I might not really build a good relationship with them in the moment, I'm trying to build a lot of those different connections. Zig Ziglar actually said, you can do anything you want if you help enough people. So I try to make those connections. The second thing I would say is Stephen Covey's book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. One of the things that he mentions is interdependence. So when it comes to community, before you build a community, you're probably working on your career and you're dependent on your employer and so forth. You want to get independent. That's the goal, right? You just want to be independent so you don't need help, somebody helping you with your job. You can just do your job independently. There's a third level that he talks about, and that's interdependence, where I rely on you, you rely on me, we rely on each other, and we're, working together. That's true community in my mind. So
Yeah, those are some valuable points. I know you mentioned about snowboarding. I wanted to ask you, what do you like to do when you're not building communities or talking about QMS? What do you
yeah.
like to do outside of work?
Oddly enough, this is something I don't think I've ever talked about on a podcast or on my own or anyone else's. But well, I actually have a farm, believe it or not.
Wow. Nice.
We have 4 pigs, 22 chickens, and a massive. We're working on building out our massive garden. Most of this is it's my wife's and my interdependent dream, if that makes sense. But
Wow.
we live on 12 acres with a farm, working on those things. So that's one of the things that takes a lot of my time. The other thing is, yes, you mentioned snowboarding. I have an annual guys trip that I go on that started out where 10 guys would pile into a hotel room and we spent most of our time on the slopes. It's gotten a little bit nicer as we've gotten a little bit older and can afford a little bit better, but I still go with those guys on that annual guys trip as much as I can. So those things are really fun.
Do you have any help with the farm, or it's just you and your wife that takes care of everything?
It's just and when I say farm, I use that term loosely. It's
Yeah.
we have 12 acres with some animals,
Right, right.
but yeah, it's just my wife and I. So we have a good time though. If anyone's ever in Nashville, feel free to hit me up. I'd love to show you our pigs.
Yeah, I might be coming there. I'm not sure yet. I haven't confirmed my trip, but might be coming there end of April. If I do, I'll let you know.
Yeah, definitely. That'd be great.
So where can listeners find you, connect with you to talk more?
Yeah. So 2 places. Obviously, we mentioned LinkedIn. I'm very active on LinkedIn, but I also try to keep things pretty light on LinkedIn. It's mostly storytelling. If you wanted to find me at community.greenlight.guru, that's the official community I'm building. It's where you can find the real meat of the conversation. Last year, I held a weekly Ask Me Anything session with industry leaders like Human Factors on 62366, cybersecurity for software as a medical device, things like that. The more heavier topics with an industry expert. So community.greenlight.guru is a great place to find me as well.
Okay, great. We'll put those links in the show notes. And Yeah, I mean, this was a great conversation. I know we've interacted before on LinkedIn, but we never met in person until this recording. So thank you so much for coming on to the show. Any final thoughts you want to add?
I'll add one thing. So you mentioned a book. You gave me a book recommendation for Story Brand by Miller. I'm going to give
Yes.
you a book recommendation as well. This is one I'm working through right now. It's called Cardiac Arrest.
Mm-hmm.
5 Heart-Stopping Years as a CEO on the Fed's Hit List by Howard Root. So one of the reason I'm excited about this book, this was given to me by Mark Duvall from Minneapolis, and I'll be interviewing the author of this book in May at the True Quality Roadshow, a free event that we're holding in Minneapolis. So if you're ever in Minneapolis in May, or if you happen to be there, definitely come to the roadshow. You get to hear us interview Howard Root in person. I'm really excited about it.
Yeah, thanks. I'm gonna check that. I'm gonna watch this footage again and then grab the name of that book. But yeah, thanks so much. It was a pleasure having you on.
All
Thank
right.
you.
Take care.